questions at any time. Just make sure you're recording notes and that you are also writing down the 5 facts. I put space for 5 facts, but she's going to give you a lot more than 5. So if you guys want to add lines, you can. If you don't want to do a numbered list and you just want to go to the bottom of your document and just type, that's fine too. Whatever you want to do, this is a place for you to keep notes on this topic. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Kevin, while you're up, can you flip the lights out so we can see the screen better? Is that going to mess you up?
Nope, I think we're still good.
Still good? And is there, how do we test the volume, or it's just, should be fine?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can always raise it.
Okay. All right. Okay, so this is Kelly, and they're all yours, Kelly.
Okay. Yes, so please, if y'all have any questions while I'm talking, just raise your hand. You can just call me Kelly. I work for Florida Fish and Wildlife. That's FWC, Florida Fish and Wildlife. I specialize only in gopher tortoises, but like your teacher said, if you have questions about any other species in the state of Florida, we have someone who covers it. So we are the folks within the state of Florida who work on all of our wildlife, fish, mammals, reptiles, anything you can think of. You all look like a smart group of kids. Who can tell me the difference between a tortoise and a turtle? Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So all tortoises are turtles. Not all turtles are tortoises. Tortoise is the word that we use to refer to any turtles that live entirely on the land. So how many of y'all in your neighborhoods around the area have seen a gopher tortoise before? Not as many as other classes. I'm sure some of you have seen tortoises before. They are our only true tortoise in the entire eastern half of the United States. So none of our other turtles look quite like a gopher tortoise. You can kind of tell from looking at them that they are meant to be on land versus in the water. For an aquatic turtle, you would see webbing on their feet. They're kind of flattened so they move through the water easily, but tortoises are meant mainly for digging and for moving around on the land in dry areas. So they have those nice big front feet with long claws that they use to dig, and then their back feet are much more for mobility on the land versus in the water. If you know anyone or you have any neighbors that keeps pet tortoises, the only time you might see a tortoise that is not a gopher tortoise would be if you have a neighbor that has a pet who escaped their yard, something like that. We do have people that keep exotic tortoises. They are much, much larger than gopher tortoises, like 100 plus pounds, where a gopher tortoise only gets to be about 10, 15 pounds. So if you ever see a giant tortoise walking around, you can call Florida Fish and Wildlife. We will help find a home for that tortoise, but they are not a natural tortoise in our environment. If you're trying to tell the difference between a male tortoise and a female tortoise, it's the same rule for all turtles, really. Males are curved inwards underneath, females are flat. The males are shaped so that they can fit on top of females. And they also have, in tortoises, they have this long horn that comes out from underneath their shells. They use that to ram and flip other males. So male tortoises fight with other male tortoises, and if you ever see tortoises kind of chasing each other around or bashing each other around, that's natural behavior for them. It's combat. And that horn is built to kind of fit under another male and flip him over. So that's totally natural if you ever see that happening in the wild. That's part of their life history. All of our turtles and tortoises and our sea turtles, it's kind of a characteristic of turtles in general, live for a really long time. So they have a very slow metabolism. It takes them a long time to grow, but that also means that they can live much longer, often longer than people can. So your average life expectancy for a gopher tortoise in the wild is 60-ish years. In captivity, there's a lot more room there. The oldest tortoise alive, or the oldest gopher tortoise alive on record, just celebrated his 100th birthday. So they live for a really long time, but it takes them a long time to get to that adult tortoise that you might have seen in the wild before. and the first 10 to 20 years of their life, they're kind of just focused on growing. They're not mature adult tortoises until they're sort of teens or 20s. So much like a lot of our other turtles, very slow growing and very slow to reach maturity. If you ever see little baby gopher tortoises, they are very cute. They're a lot harder to find. The first 10 years of their life or so are kind of a mystery. They're really good at hiding, and you don't really start to see them until they reach kind of young adulthood. But they hatch out of their shells still soft and squishy. It takes about 10 years for that shell to actually be fully hard and predator proof. And before then, they are soft, and that's when they're sort of most vulnerable to predation. So a nest that a female tortoise lays, she lays about 5 to 7 eggs. She only lays that nest once a year. And those eggs take about 3 months to hatch, but in those 3 months, have about a 99% chance of getting in. So everything likes to eat gopher tortoise eggs: foxes, coyotes, raccoons, skunks, snakes, lizards, birds. Everything likes to eat gopher tortoise eggs. Everything likes to eat baby gopher tortoises. It is a long and difficult life to go from being an egg to a hard adult gopher tortoise. And like I said, they are soft for the first 10 years of their life. That once they get through that, nothing really eats them. They're pretty predator proof, but it's hard to get there. Yeah.
Do they live with their parents?
No, that's a great question. So there's a couple exceptions to this, but reptiles, for the most part, tortoises included, have no kind of parental care. So the female digs the nest. Sometimes she digs that near her burrow, but once they're laid and covered, she doesn't check on them, doesn't sit on them. Once they hatch out, they kind of disperse and do their own thing. They can dig little burrows when they're little, or they'll kind of just find a lot of vegetation to hide in, and they have no interactions with their siblings, no kind of interactions with their parents. They're on their own from when they hatch. Do you have a question? So tortoises are herbivores. They are vegetarians. They like a lot of our native grasses and fruiting plants and shrubs, anything kind of low and green. Cactus is a good one. Blueberry, blackberry, raspberry, anything kind of low and shrubby that produces fruit is really good tortoise food. We kind of call them like the little cows that live in your backyard. You'll see them grazing on people's lawns and things like that. And they will kind of eat throughout the whole day. But they don't move very far to eat, so they're not traveling really long distances. If you have an area with good gopher tortoise food, chances are they'll kind of stay right in that area throughout their whole day. So your unit is on endangered species here. Tortoises are protected in some way across their whole range. So western Alabama into Louisiana, the gopher tortoise does occur, but it is a federally listed species, so it's protected under the Federal Endangered Species Act. It's managed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Elsewhere, so eastern part of their range, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida, they are what we would call a candidate species, so we are currently considering listing them federally under the Endangered Species Act. Until then, they are protected through state wildlife agencies across their whole range. So we have them in all 67 counties of Florida, and they have that protection across all of those counties. They're very habitat specific. They specialize in dry habitats. Tortoises are a sort of desert group of species. So in our uplands here in Florida, anywhere where there's deep sandy soils and you're not getting flooding or sort of constant submersion in the water, that's good gopher tortoise habitat. We also like to remind people that your backyards, your neighborhoods, your parks, that can be good gopher tortoise habitat too. It really depends on if you have good soil, and chances are if there's people living there, there is good soil, because people don't like to live in swamps. And as long as there's grass or those other plants they like to eat, they can be just as happy in our neighborhoods. The trick with that is making sure that people in those neighborhoods are respectful of the species and are doing their best to be good tortoise neighborhoods or tortoise neighbors, that they can persist just about anywhere. Yeah.
Would there be a reason for somebody to actually kill them on purpose?
Sure, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But yes, people do kill them on purpose. We'll get to that in a little bit. That's a good question. So, what makes tortoises special and unique, especially unique from our other turtles, is the fact that they dig these burrow systems. So, every tortoise has at least one burrow. They might have more than one burrow. If you see sort of a tortoise-shaped hole in the ground, and you see multiple tortoise-shaped holes in the ground, those are all individual burrows that might be shared by a single tortoise, or they might have multiple tortoises in them. They do not share burrows with other tortoises, so if a tortoise is down in its burrow and another tortoise comes along, they will shoot right out of their burrow and shoo that other tortoise away. They're not good at sharing, but like I said, you can tell a tortoise burrow from just about any other sort of hole in the ground because it has that really flat bottom, flat and smooth, and then that sort of tortoise-shaped half moon on top. That burrow, and the fact that the tortoise digs that burrow is why we refer to them as a keystone species. So what that means is without that species in the environment, you would lose many other species and you kind of lose a key part of that ecosystem. So there are over 360 other species of wildlife that use gopher tortoise burrows. That's all the way from taking shelter in them temporarily. If, for example, a wildfire moves through, they can go down into the burrow and hide there and leave when the fire has passed. All the way to animals that spend 100% of their life cycle down in the burrow. So if we lose tortoises and we lose those burrows as a habitat, all of a sudden we've lost kind of a whole ecosystem built around the tortoise. Many of those wildlife species are also endangered, threatened, somehow protected species. So we see, in areas where tortoises have declined, those other species decline also. So threats to gopher tortoises, why are they a threatened species? Why do we manage them and regulate them? The biggest thing for much of our wildlife in Florida, but also for gopher tortoises, is loss of habitat. So kind of like I mentioned, we like to build where tortoises like to live. And as we lose that habitat and isolate our tortoises in kind of smaller and smaller natural areas, it becomes really hard for that species to persist. And that is true for much of our wildlife. As we lose habitat, we lose that wildlife. There is an illness that is a really big concern for gopher tortoises, so it's called upper respiratory tract disease. It's a bacterial infection that gives them kind of flu-like symptoms, so they kind of lose interest in eating, they can't breathe as well, they kind of slow down, and sometimes they can have that at kind of low levels and just persist the way that we get the flu or a cold. And sometimes if you have a lot of tortoises in a small area and they sort of pass that disease amongst one another, it can wipe out populations of tortoises. So we are concerned about sort of disease spread amongst these sort of smaller local populations. Like you asked, why would someone want to kill a gopher tortoise? They're pretty benign, they can't hurt people. They were, and still to some degree are, a food source. So before we listed the species, they became a listed threatened species in the late 80s. Before then it was legal to harvest them for food. And we do have parts of the state where we know they were basically eaten into extinction. So that's kind of the number one thing. People also often will take them out of the wild to sell as pets. The baby gopher tortoises look like some of our baby exotic tortoises, and it's easy for people to kind of stick them in and sell them as pets. So that's your answer for why would people kill them? It's usually to eat them, which is less of an issue now that it is illegal to do so, but people do still do it. So conserving tortoises in your neighborhoods. How many of y'all have a pet dog? So, dogs have, as of this year, surpassed cars as the #1 cause of injury and death to tortoises. The biggest thing you can do is be a responsible dog owner, just like you don't want your dog running loose chasing people. When they chase tortoises, they can stress them out, which makes them vulnerable to being sick, or they can actually, catch and harm or kill the tortoise. So that's our biggest issue for tortoises that are in more like neighborhood areas. The #1 thing you can do if you see someone's dog going at a tortoise is talk to whoever owns that dog and tell them why that's not a good idea. But we do have a list of landscaping plants that are good for tortoises, and we do have communities who want to make like tortoise safe gardens, and we'll go out and plant these tortoise food plants, so things that tortoises like to eat. And then the other really big thing for areas where there's a lot of tortoises and people is helping them across roads. So this is probably the #1 question I get is, I know I'm not allowed to touch it, but what if I see that it's about to get hit by a car? If you can do so safely, so obviously don't put yourself in harm's way, but if you see a tortoise about to cross the street and you're worried about it getting hit by a car, you can pick it up and move it to the other side of the road. That's kind of the main exception to the don't touch gopher tortoises rule. So they are, like all other turtles, slow, and they cannot outwalk a car. And so you are probably saving that tortoise's life by doing so. And you figure it took, a tortoise that size probably 20, 30 years to get there. So you're doing a very big, meaningful thing just by helping them across the road in that way.
And you always want to move them in the direction they're going.
Yes, yeah. So tortoises have a very strong sense of direction and know where they're trying to get to. If you move them anywhere other than the direction they were going, they will turn around and go back that way. Yeah.
So, because some tourists will be on the highway, like a lot, like where I live, and if they're going one way and it's across the highway, another highway again, like, would you have to, like, put it in your car and drive around?
So you mean like a multi-lane, like there's a divider and everything like that?
Yeah.
That would probably be sort of the only time where, it says do not put it in your car. If it's genuinely going straight across the highway, as long as you see where you pick it up and you're putting it down right across the road, that's doing the same thing. Yeah.
Because on the highway, like where I live, there's a pond, and then there's the highway, and then there's the little line of grass, and there's the other highway.
Yeah, and they do, depending on how big those dividers are, or if there's, grass on both sides of the highway, sometimes they spend their whole lives just living, like, in the highway right of way. So it's not necessarily that they're lost, they may just be trying to walk kind of up and down that. But yeah, if you see them actually crossing over in to the highway, then same thing, you're okay to help them cross the road as long as it's safe for you. So other than that, do you have a question really quick?
Like FWC have to do a laser to control areas?
Yeah, that's a good question. So FWC is made of many different parts. So within Florida Fish and Wildlife, we have our own division of law enforcement. So there are wildlife officers who are trained in kind of evaluating wildlife crimes and violations, and they do, they're the ones, if you saw someone harassing a tortoise, our law enforcement would respond to that. And outside of law enforcement, you have folks like me who are biologists who do not carry a badge or a gun or anything like that, but work for the same agency. And yeah, so no selfies with tortoises. Other than helping them across the road, that would be the only time where we would say, yeah, you're okay to touch that tortoise. So other things you can do to kind of participate in the conservation of this species, Gopher Tortoise Day is recognized statewide. It's every year on April 10th. And we do participate in community events, fairs, school presentations, things like that. You already have a Gopher Tortoise Day resolution in Charlotte County, but we do have a Gopher Tortoise Day website where you can get resources for making your community sort of more tortoise aware. So gophertortoisedayflorida.com is a really good resource for y'all to look at. And then finally, some ways that you can actually help us collect data for Gopher Tortoises. It's as easy as using your smartphone. We have a Gopher Tortoise app where you can take a picture and upload your location information, and we can see where you are seeing Gopher Tortoises. So we do use that information all the time, especially for seeing neighborhoods that have good, strong Gopher Tortoise populations, or streets where tortoises are getting hit by cars all the time. So that's a really good way to kind of actively participate in the conservation of the species. You all will have a copy of all these links, so don't feel like you need to take them all down now, but if you choose to work with Gopher Tortoises for your project, these are all really good places to go for that info. Any question? Tortoises? I had that question earlier if they bite people. You would have to, stick your hand in their face to get bitten. They're not aggressive, they don't chase people. It'll hurt. So they don't have teeth, but they have like a beak. So they have a hard, jagged that it will hurt if you get bit. But if you're, just picking them up to get them across the road, they don't have really long necks, so they can't reach around and bite you like some of our other turtles. The worst thing that may happen to you if you pick them up is you will get pooped on. So not dangerous, but that is a hazard of getting a tortoise across the road. And we should have plenty of time. Please ask me any questions, especially like your teacher mentioned, if you have questions about the agency or becoming a wildlife biologist, anything that I can help you guys with. Yeah.
How come we can't own as many animals as we could in the past?
That is a good question that I don't have an answer for because I don't work with captive wildlife a lot. So we do have a branch of our agency that deals with captive wildlife, especially some of our exotic pet species and things like that. I would say our website would be a good resource for something like that. Yeah.
Because when my mom was 8 or 9 years old, she had a wolf dog, and that was the nicest thing ever. It was only me because her neighbor killed it.
Okay.
It would beat them up and stuff when they left the house.
Yeah, I don't know anything about wolf dogs. I'm sorry, but our website will definitely have information on captive pet species like that. Yeah. They can move more quickly than people give them credit for over kind of short distances, but they cannot go for a jog the way you or I could. Yeah, they're not built for speed. Anything else? Yeah.
Wait, really?
Go ahead, Sam.
How come you chose to help with Gopher tortoises and other animals?
So, my background is kind of in reptiles and amphibians in general. So I worked a lot with other species of turtles and frogs and stuff like that when I was going to school and when I was working before this job. I moved from the Northeast down to Florida specifically to work with Florida wildlife because we have some pretty amazing diverse species of wildlife here. So tortoises were just a good fit for kind of the experience that I had. But they genuinely are a super interesting species to me. The whole sort of network of species built around them is really interesting. So they're a good species to work with. Yeah?
Why do people eat the Gopher tortoise?
I don't know what Gopher tortoises taste like. I don't know if they're particularly tasty. They're easy to obtain if you know where to look for them because they can't really run away from you. So in that way, they're an easier food source, but you figure it takes you a couple months to get a chicken big enough to eat it. It takes you 2 decades to get a tortoise big enough to eat it. So they're not a good, sustainable source of food. Yeah.
Is their shell worth anything? Do people kill them for their shell?
I don't know that there's a big demand for their shells. They're not made out of anything special. It's bone covered in the same thing that our fingernails are made out of. And when they're adults, they're just, one solid grayish, brownish color. So they're not super pretty the way box turtles are, things like that that have really bright patterns. So I don't think a lot of people harvest them just for their shells. It's technically, because of the listing on the species, you can't have a Gopher tortoise shell, even if you just found it in your yard, you can't have that without a special license to have it.
it's like how are they able to chop the shell or tear
Is part of them able to tear off the shell?
Like a predator, like if a predator was
Yeah, so most of our predators, like coyotes and foxes and things like that, can't get enough of their mouth around the shell to actually like crack into the shell, but they can definitely, bite towards the edge of the shell. And we see that a lot with dogs too, where kind of like the front part of the shell near where their arms are, the dogs will get that part and can break that part because it's easier for them to get their mouths around. So there's, like I said, their shells are bone. They can break just like our bones do. Yeah.
How many eggs will
An average nest has about 6 eggs in it. I think the biggest nest we've ever sort of seen had 10 maybe, but that's a big nest. They don't have many every year. Yeah.
For animals that you need permits for, like where would you go to even get a permit? How much would it
So
cost?
you can go on our website, somifwc.com. I am not familiar with those permits, but most of our permits you apply for online. So I'm not sure on cost, but everything, for captive wildlife species you could access from our website. Yeah.
What would happen if the gopher tortoise became extinct?
So, some of those wildlife that kind of just use the burrows occasionally would probably be okay. Many, 100 plus, 200 plus species of those wildlife would also go extinct. They can't persist anywhere but the burrows. So, number of individual species, we would lose a lot of diversity. Just losing that kind of structure of the burrow in the system would probably also cause some changes to the functioning of our ecosystem, just because so many other species use that as shelter and everything. But the big loss there would be biodiversity. Yeah.
How many gopher tortoises die in a year?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think that we know the answer to that. Because some of that will be natural. It is natural for them to die of old age over time. And some of that is human driven, so getting hit by cars, getting bit by dogs, things like that. So I don't have a good idea of that.
Are they allowed to build on lots where there are gopher tortoises? Build houses or buildings and things?
Yes, after the tortoises are moved off of those lots. So the legal status around the tortoise right now is that you need a permit to safely relocate a tortoise before there's any kind of building work that happens on property. If you see folks with like building equipment and you also see a very clear, obvious gopher tortoise burrow, there's a chance that that's a violation, that there's something illegal occurring there, and you can always contact us and we can kind of help figure out how to address that.
And how close can people get to the burrow?
So if they're trying to like exclude it from development, it's a minimum of 25 feet. That's if the tortoise burrow is on like the edge of the property and they wanted to not get too close to it. If the burrow's in the middle and you want to like clear a circle around that burrow, the 25 feet doesn't apply. You can't like clear a crop circle around the burrow and leave it there. It has to be moved first.
Could someone fence in their yard with a burrow in their yard?
If it's a fence that the tortoise can't get out under, then they need to move the tortoise first. If it's raised and the tortoise can naturally pass back and forth, then they don't have to. Any other questions? Yeah.
Okay, so like this is not in my generation, but like my mom's generation, there was like a lot more pet stores for like different animals, just not just like birds and fish like what we have now. Like how come that is?
I don't know. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm not sure. I don't have any kind of background in like our captive wildlife as a pet trade or anything like that. Some of it may be changes in our laws, like you said. I think a lot of people move towards getting some of those species online, so they don't have like a storefront, but you can still get those species, but I'm not totally sure. Yeah.
Have you told me like
So from one given nest, like I said, there's like a 99% chance of them getting eaten. Same thing for when they're little, so from like hatching to about 10 years old, 99% chance of getting eaten. So very, very few would be sort of the easy answer, I guess. It is a hard thing to go from being a baby tortoise to an adult tortoise.
So do they stick in herds? Like,
No, they will, you'll see kind of concentrations of them in an area, but that's more because the habitat there is really good for them. They are kind of social, like you will see them interact with other tortoises, but they don't have like a herd or a group that way.
how do they interact?
So it's really interesting. So you get the males fighting other males. You sometimes get females fighting other females if females get too close to the burrow of another female. Males during breeding season go to like as many female burrows as they can possibly get to. So they're visiting lots of ladies. And females and males, the females will also, if it's like a little male trying to come and romance a big female, sometimes the females will just like kick them out and go back in the burrow.